Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 331. Joining me today, two of the most legendary columnists of our time. Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune. He spent most of his career there. And Jonathan Alter, who is at Newsweek and NBC. He's also a best-selling author of several books about President Obama, FDR, most recently Jimmy Carter. Great conversations with both. Cannot wait for you to hear them. And gotta say, I was pretty impressed with myself that both of them joined me. But why shouldn't they? I've known both of them a long time, and there's some mutual admiration and respect. At least it seemed that way. Very accomplished guys, and quite a privilege to speak with both of them. Coming up. But first, a lot of news to get to. Yesterday, more horrible chapters in the history of American racism. Joe Biden announcing that we will be pulling out of Afghanistan. Lindsey Graham has a temper tantrum. And the Bachelor is gay. Colton Underwood, yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with that story, too. So I say that we should get to it. But before I hit the last 24 news, I just want to say thank you to so many of you that reached out to me. I got messages all day long from folks who listened to yesterday's episode of this podcast where I talked about my daughter's spine and scoliosis and the remarkable recovery. And go back and listen to that if you hadn't, because so happy about that. And yesterday was such a good day because of that. And thank you to all of you who reached out to me. If I haven't thanked you, so many people, thank you so much. Very kind words from so many amazing people in this community. I hope to see you tonight at the Hangout, everybody. Virtual Hangout on Zoom. Usually 50 or more folks, part of the stand-up community. If you're not already, sign up right now and show up tomorrow night. Lots to talk about, including my panic attack from tonight. I almost didn't do the show, but I'm trying to put it together. I'll tell you all about it on Thursday night. I'm sure you can relate. But now it's time to get to the news and what happened yesterday in the last 24 hours. Let's do it. All right, let me just start with the big story from yesterday, which was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being paused, being put on hold. There's a lot of people arguing, smart people arguing about whether or not that was a good idea. What kind of message does it send? Why would you do this? 6 million people have gotten that shot, and only 6 women had adverse reactions, and 1 did in fact die. But that's not why you wouldn't. When you put the pause on it, you send the wrong message, and people get afraid. Dr. Anthony Fauci trying to tell people, no, that this makes people feel better when we put pauses on things, when we recall things. I don't know where you stand on it. I'll talk to you about it tonight, maybe at the Hangout. I'm sure it'll come up. But I thought this was a great exchange between CNN's John Berman and Dr. Fauci on CNN yesterday.
You know that there is this issue of vaccine hesitancy out there, broadly speaking, not just about Johnson & Johnson, but about vaccines in general. One of the reasons is some of the things people say. And last night, I want to read you, I don't want to play it because I'm not sure that helps the cause here of saving lives, something that TV personality Tucker Carlson said on TV about vaccines in general. He said, if vaccines are effective, there's no reason for people who have received the vaccine to wear masks or avoid physical contact. So maybe it doesn't work. And they're simply not telling you that. Let me repeat that again. So maybe it doesn't work, and they're simply not telling you that. What do you have to say to Tucker Carlson?
Yeah. That's just a typical crazy conspiracy theory. Why would we not tell people if it doesn't work? Look at the data. The data are overwhelming. In the 3 vaccines that have been approved for use in an emergency use authorization, the J&J, the Pfizer, and the Moderna, you had 30,000, 44,000, and 40,000 people in a clinical trial with an overwhelming signal of efficacy. So I don't have any idea what he's talking about.
How dangerous is it for a TV personality like that, who does have an audience of millions, to speculate about something like that?
Well, it's certainly not helpful to the public health of this nation or even globally. You know, I don't want to get into arguments about Tucker Carlson, but to me, it's just, you know, it's counter to what we were trying to accomplish to protect the safety and the health of the American public.
One of the things, there's different levels of vaccine hesitancy, right? There are anti-vaxxers. And then there are people, one attitude some people have is a wait-and-see approach. I want to wait and see what happens as more and more people get the vaccine. What's your message overall, and generally speaking, to the wait-and-see people with the vaccine?
Man, you know, it's understandable why people do that. I mean, you don't want to be pejorative against them. I mean, that's a natural instinct of wanting to wait and see. But what you tell people, let's look at the data, okay? What we have right now, we have over 120, close to 130 million people have already received at least one dose of this. I mean, that's a lot of people. I mean, how long do you want to wait and see? I mean, you have almost half the country has received at least one dose. So I think we've had enough wait and see. Let's do it.
All right, so that's the only soundbite I've got for you on COVID-related news, but I thought that was interesting. The debate will continue on that. Other related stories, the COVID-related stories, the virus is surging in Puerto Rico. Officials urge people to follow safety precautions. Panel of independent experts to the CDC says it needs more time now to assess what we were just talking about there, the data and risks during the Johnson & Johnson vaccine pause. The European Union's vaccination campaign gets a lift from Pfizer as it promised a big switch in strategy. The airline industry apparently is saying empty middle seats do reduce virus risk on planes. Well, I don't know if it's the airline industry saying it. A new study is saying that, taking no account of mask wearing. Denmark says it's permanently stopping the use of AstraZeneca vaccine. And New York City officials say most people scheduled to get Johnson & Johnson vaccines will keep their appointments but get other doses. Finally, Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is again resisting to impose new restrictions as cases keep surging there. It's a tough political decision for her at this point to be making. How is it in your world? Are you fully vaccinated? Did you get your first? You're waiting on your second? My second is April 29th, and I can't wait. Although I do feel pretty vaccinated. I feel like it's like 80% right now, but still not taking any crazy risks. All right, that is your COVID-related news. Yesterday, there was an arrest in the shooting of Dante Wright out there in Brooklyn Center. The police officer who shot him has been arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter, I think it is. And we'll learn more about that with legal analysts. That's just an absolutely crazy story. It continues to develop. But when I saw that news, I said exactly what the other officer at that shooting said after she shot and killed him, or after she shot him. The other officer on the scene, if you heard it, said, "Oh well, yeah, oh well, Officer Potter, you're going to jail, maybe." But she has been arrested and is in an orange jumpsuit. Quite a sight to see. So you also might have heard about the young black man who was walking around a neighborhood in South Carolina. I mean, it's every day this past week. I think it's almost every day we've seen incidents caught on camera of people doing pretty horrific things to innocent black people, or so it certainly seems, given the context that I've seen. Well, that guy has now been apparently arrested for assault. I don't know if you even saw that one, but it's a pretty interesting story that's developing. Also, thousands of protesters showed up at his beautiful suburban home last night to show their displeasure with what he had done. Pretty crazy developments in South Carolina there. President Joe Biden yesterday visited Arlington National Cemetery to pay his respects to service members who'd lost their lives in Afghanistan. He formally announced his decision to end the 20-year, largely unsuccessful American effort to remake Afghanistan, declaring yesterday that he would withdraw the remaining few thousand United States troops in the country by September 11th.
I spoke yesterday with President Bush to inform him of my decision. While he and I have had many disagreements over policy throughout the years, we're absolutely united in our respect and support for the valor, courage, and integrity of the women and men of the United States Armed Forces who served. I'm immensely grateful for the bravery and backbone that they have shown through nearly 2 decades of combat deployments. We as a nation are forever indebted to them and to their families. You all know that less than 1% of Americans serve in armed forces. The remaining 99% of them, we owe them. We owe them. They've never backed down from a single mission that we've asked of them. I've witnessed their bravery firsthand during my visits to Afghanistan. They've never wavered in their resolve. They've paid a tremendous price on our behalf. And they have the thanks of a grateful nation.
I recommend you go listen to the rest of, or read the rest of his reasoning for that. I fully support this move. I'm covering Afghanistan, talking to veterans, reporters, and Afghans themselves about it. And the argument that they can if we leave, they could reconstitute and pose a threat. It infuriates me. They can do that anywhere. It's the internet. The terrorist threat that we should be putting a lot more concern and resources into is the one right here at home. Yeah, the good old boys. That one, Al-Qaeda. That's where we should mostly be concerned. It is not take your eye off Islamic extremists yet. There's no need really for American troops to be in Afghanistan. That's my opinion. I mean, there are awful, awful things that will probably inevitably happen if the Taliban takes back over fully to women and girls. It's the most tragic, terrible situation. Part of me makes me think because we broke it, we own it, and we should keep troops there. I'm just not sure how much it's helping. So I don't think it's an easy call, but I just don't like the idea that people are saying, well, terrorists are going to reconstitute. They think they can do it anywhere. Internet. They don't need a home base. They don't need those stupid Al-Qaeda monkey bars. Ridiculous. Here is now President Biden visiting Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery, where Americans killed in Afghanistan and Iraq are buried.
It means I have trouble these days ever showing up at a veteran cemetery and not thinking of my son, who proudly insisted on putting on that uniform and going with his unit to Iraq and giving up his spot as Attorney General in the state of Delaware because he thought it was the right thing to do. And look at them all.
Sorry for the terrible audio, but he said, I have trouble these days ever showing up at a cemetery and not thinking of my son, Bo. And then he said, look at them all. And he kind of moves out of the frame, and you see hundreds of gravestones there in Arlington, Section 60. Okay, so here is the whining of the critics. First, Lindsey Graham, a chicken hawk himself, even though I guess he served in that jag. Screw this guy, but here he is, begging the president to keep American troops in Afghanistan.
I miss John McCain a lot, but probably no more than today, because if John were with us, I'd be speaking second, and he would be telling you a story about how unwise this decision is to withdraw all of our forces from Afghanistan, so you can say on September 9/11/2021 we're out. The conditions on the ground and the military advice runs counter to that decision. But the one thing I want to say is that President Biden, I respect him, but I completely disagree. I've tried to work with presidents of both parties when it comes to the war on terror. I stood up to President Trump when he announced our unilateral withdrawal from Syria, and to his credit, he listened and adjusted his policies. I have been pushing the Trump administration that if you want to do a deal with the Taliban, make sure the conditions are met before we agree to the end game. The Taliban have been trying to drive us out for years.
All right, I've heard enough from him, and now let's listen to another senator. Here is Senator Bernie Sanders on Afghanistan.
I think the president is right. Wolf, I think 20 years of war, the longest war in the history of this country in Afghanistan, is enough. I think 2,500 brave men and women who gave their lives in that war is enough. I think the expenditure of $2 trillion is enough. In other words, enough is enough. So I applaud what the president has done. And in truth, despite what Mitch McConnell was just saying, what President Biden is doing is picking up on the a negotiated agreement that President Trump put together. I am not a great fan of Donald Trump and his administration, but he was right in trying to end endless wars. These wars cannot continue to go on forever. And we've got to learn that in many respects, diplomacy, various types of educational aid, healthcare aid is much more important and much more effective than an occupying force on the ground.
Okay, Bernie Sanders on CNN yesterday on Afghanistan. The pullout expected by September 11th, 20 years. I'll be talking to folks here on the show about that, including veterans who served, foreign policy analysts, journalists, and anybody else that you think would be good. Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com as always. I was paying as much attention as I could to this very impressive woman, Kristen Clark, who is Joe Biden's nominee to lead the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Grew up in public housing in Brooklyn, daughter of Jamaican immigrants, and now she's in line to become the first woman of color to formally lead the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division since it was created in 1957. That is, if she can get through this closely divided Senate where Republicans really tried to take her apart, but failed miserably, and she kept her poise and composure. Brilliant woman, very impressive, very qualified. But she appeared before Judiciary Committee yesterday, where lawmakers assessed her record, and it's a long one, 21 years at the Justice Department, where she prosecuted dozens of cases, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where she defended voting rights, and on to New York Attorney General's office, where she played a role in settlements for women who face mistreatment on the job. And here now is just a part of her opening statement, and I encourage you to watch it all, but here we go.
And lessons from being a single mother juggling the demands of this work. But perhaps most important would be the fulfillment of the promise I made to myself as a 16-year-old girl in that Connecticut courthouse. As I look at my own son, now the same age I was when I entered that Connecticut courtroom, I remain committed to the promise of working every day to build a world of equal opportunity for all, a world where no 16-year-old is the target of hateful language, a world where no young man is racially profiled. I dream of a world that values his mind, his heart, and his exceptional soccer skills, and does not push him aside because of the color of his skin. I dream of that for every child in America. As the head of the Civil Rights Division, I will bring the same clear-eyed pursuit of justice that has guided me my entire life. I would be honored for you to grant me this humbling opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Well, several of the Republicans on the committee tried to land shots and criticisms against her, from Mike Lee to Tom Cotton to stupid John Cornyn of Texas. You got to hear this one.
Well, maybe there's a misprint, but I'm sure you can clear it up for me. Dating back to your days when in school, when you seemed to argue that African Americans were genetically superior to Caucasians. Is that correct?
No, Senator. That I believe you're referring to an op-ed that I wrote at the age of 19 about the bell curve theory, a racist book that equated DNA with genetics and race. As a black student at Harvard that time, we took grave offense to this book. It was co-authored by a Harvard professor. We did a number of events to speak out against the book, and this op-ed opened with a satirical reference to the statement that you just noted. Contemporaneous reporting by the campus paper made very clear that this was not a view that I espoused. What I was seeking to do was to hold up a mirror and put one racist theory alongside another to challenge people as to why we were unwilling to wholly reject the racist theory that defined the bell curve book.
So this was satire?
Absolutely, Senator.
And where was that published?
in the student paper, the Harvard Crimson, and there is contemporaneous reporting from that time, from that day, that makes clear that these were not views that I espouse, Senator.
And you had to see his face. It's unbelievable that none of his aides told him that college paper was, in fact, satire. Man, John Cornyn stinks. There was also this moment when Tom Cotton got really pissed at Dick Durbin, who is the chairman on the Senate Judiciary Committee, after Dick Durbin asked him to allow the nominee, Kristen Clarke, to finish her responses. This is kind of fun.
That you won't answer the simple question, yes or no. Let's turn to another case, which Jacob Blake...
Senator, could you please just allow her opportunity to respond?
Could you please stop your pattern of interrupting me repeatedly? This happened the last time we had a hearing.
I'm sorry.
You called a vote in violation of this committee's rules.
I will give you additional time, but I'd like to give her a chance to complete her answer.
I've asked her a simple yes or no question multiple times. She refuses to answer it. Thank you, though, for your input. Let's turn to another case, Jacob Blake, which Jacob Blake... that you won't answer the simple question, yes or no.
You know, it's kind of hard to decide who is the biggest prick in the Republican Senate. It's tough. It's up there between, it's obviously Ted Cruz is one of the top. Lindsey Graham is real bad. But Tom Cotton, I don't know. I feel like it might be between Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, although there are plenty of others who I should probably mention. But yeah, that was just such a dick, Tom Cotton. All right, so I highly recommend you read a little bit more about Kristen Clarke and learn more about what the Civil Rights Division and Department of Justice does, and I'm going to do that with you. A lot of really smart people. Laura Coates used to work there. I should probably get her on to talk about the kinds of things that get done in the Civil Rights Division and Department of Justice and why it matters that a black woman will be leading that department. Oh, and I love this tweet about that from my friend, comedian, former producer on The Apprentice, Noel Kasler, has been on the show. He tweeted, Kristen Clarke is a real-life superhero and is beating those GOP guys at their own game, and they know it. She was raised in Brooklyn, went to Choate, Harvard, and Columbia, used her superior intellect to fight discrimination and equality for all. She is everything they fear most. John Cornyn didn't know Kristen Clarke joined the boys' wrestling squad at Choate, but he sure found out quick when she pinned his dumb ass to the mat. Dude should have tapped out. And he copied John Cornyn on those tweets. I love that. I usually do a lot of politics here in the last 24, but this is culture, too. We talk about all the important things here on the program, and I hate that show, The Bachelor. I've never watched it. My daughter watches it. I don't like it. I've never liked it. The whole concept of it. I mean, I don't like most of these stupid reality shows, but I really don't like that one. But it is interesting that one of the former stars, who apparently is also a former football player, his name is Colton Underwood, came out on GMA with Robin Roberts, and I'll play that for you, which is really important and significant development in American culture, I think, because that show is so popular, and he was The Bachelor. Listen.
Colton, thank you for this opportunity to sit down with you. Is there something that you want people to know? So can you tell us what is on your heart that you want to share?
Yeah. Obviously, like, this year's been a lot for a lot of people, and it's probably made a lot of people look themselves in the mirror and figure out who they are and what they've been running from or what they've been putting off in their lives. And for me, I've ran from myself for a long time. I've hated myself for a long time, and I'm gay, and I came to terms with that earlier this year and have been processing it. And the next step in all of this was sort of letting people know. I'm still nervous, but yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
Through the nerves, I can see the joy. I can see the relief.
I mean, I'm emotional, but I'm emotional in like such a good, happy, positive way. I'm like the happiest and healthiest I've ever been in my life, and that means the world to me. And yeah.
What was that moment like for you that gave you the courage to speak your truth as you are today?
I got into a place for me in my personal life that was dark and bad, and I can list a bunch of different things, but they'd all be excuses. But I think overall the reason why now is because I got to a place where I didn't think I was ever going to share this. I would have rather died than say I'm gay. And I think that was sort of my wake-up call.
Did you ever think about harming yourself?
Yeah. There was a moment in LA that I woke up and I didn't think I was going to wake up. I didn't have the intentions of waking up, and I did. And I think for me, that was like my wake-up call. I'm like, this is your life. Take back control. And I think looking back even beyond that is like, even just suicidal thoughts and, you know, driving my car close to a cliff, like, oh, if this goes off the cliff, it's not that big of a deal. I don't feel that anymore.
So, yeah, pretty big deal. Pretty big deal yesterday. That was a big, big story. And the story that followed it up was that during the taping of The Bachelor, apparently comedian and openly gay man Billy Eichner was on the show as like a guest to do a bit or a game or something. I don't know what the hell it was, but this went viral yesterday because Billy Eichner jokingly said, maybe you're gay, and Colton Underwood had this super awkward moment of just kind of laughing it off and didn't say he wasn't, and just wanted to play that for you too.
Colton, all right, I've just met you.
Yes.
You're a virgin.
Yes.
Never even like a one night.
No. I feel like those are awkward.
No, they're fantastic. Are you gonna wait till you get married?
I'm gonna wait until I'm in love.
Fine, you get an award. Okay, but let's say then you have sex and the sex is bad.
Wait, there's always room for improvement.
Not a lot. The last time I was around this many virgins, well, I was a guest on The View. I'm glad you waited to have sex until you found someone who can successfully do a three-legged race. I think that's what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
Egg on a spoon.
Is this not criteria that you normally look for?
No, the first thing I do, I'm gay. I know that's a shock, Colton. And that I think you should look into. Maybe you're the first gay bachelor and we don't even know.
No.
Put that in your promo. See you later.
Yeah, holy shit.
Oh.
That was weird, huh? That's why that went viral. But good for him, and he's a good role model, and I have a lot of respect for him for doing that and the way that he did that, and that must have been unbelievably difficult for him for such a long time. So good on him, and I wanted to share that with you here at the end. All right, last clip for you now is your daily Jen Psaki. Here she is having her way, the president's spokesperson, in case you don't know who she is, having her way with the EWTN reporter. That's the Catholic channel, everybody. My father-in-law has it on full time, or so I'm told. Haven't seen him in a while. I don't think he listens. Listen to this.
Go ahead, Owen.
Jen, thank you. Back to Title 10, if I may. So today, as you well know, the Biden administration and HHS started the reversal of the Trump administration's ban on abortion referrals at Title 10 family planning clinics. So my first question, why does the Biden administration insist that pro-life Americans pay for abortions and violate their conscience?
Well, first, that's not an accurate depiction of what happened. So let me, and I know we want to be accurate around here, none of the funds appropriated under this title shall be used in programs where abortion is a method of family planning. That is written into the Public Health Service Act, and it specifically states that.
But we know there's indirect subsidies, money that's fungible, that can't be traced. We know that. Come on.
That is not how it works. That is the law. So I'm stating what the law is and how it is implemented legally by these organizations. And the reason since you gave me the opportunity, the reason why the president took these steps is because he believes that advancing equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality, can be helped by these actions. And by focusing on advancing equity in the Title X program, we can create opportunities for the improvement of communities that have been historically underserved, which benefits everyone. That's how these fundings are used in communities.
You talk about equity, if I may interrupt. Mm-hmm. How is it equity? How is it fighting systemic racism when abortion, we well know, disproportionately affects minority children?
Again, funding cannot be used from this for abortion, but access to health care, access to healthcare in communities that have been marginalized, underserved, adversely affected by persistent poverty is always going to be something the president fights for. Okay, I think I've answered your question. Alex, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that's that. What a smug prick he is. And by the way, it disproportionately affects black children now. They're not children. You see what he did there? They're not children. They're fetuses, not children. So, thank you. Thank you, Owen. All right, that is it for the last 24, and now it's time for all things stories rapid fire that are not COVID, that are not politics, but they are important. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Thursday's News Dump.
Shot in the derriere like your Forrest Gump. Perhaps you'll hear about it on today's News Dump.
Yes, sir. Bit me directly in the buttocks.
I like that one in collaboration between Pico and Dan McDonald. All right, let's start in hell. That's right, let's start in Hades, where Bernie Madoff has just arrived, the infamous architect of an epic security swindle that burned thousands of investors, outfoxed regulators, and earned him a 150-year prison term, died behind bars early Wednesday. He was 82. That's the Associated Press reporting. Go to a climate change, climate crisis story. Our friends at Earther are reporting that the National Park Service recently confirmed that a glacier near Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska is moving up to 100 times faster than it would be expected to, and the rare event has caught the attention of scientists. It's not an entirely new observation, but it's incredibly rare to see a massive chunk of ice move at these speeds, and there are only a few places on Earth where it happens. That is Earther reporting if you want more. And while we are talking about studies, I saw this. The average woman pops 4,153 pimples in her lifetime. And the pandemic is making things worse, apparently. A survey of 2,000 U.S. women and revealing the not-so-dermatologist-recommended ways respondents are taking the process of revitalizing their skin into their own hands, in some cases quite literally. Over 8 in 10 American women admit to popping pimples. Unfortunately, 58% add they learned a lasting lesson, saying they have at least one scar from their forays into pimple popping. Over 3/4 of those who pop say they know it's bad for their pores, but the urge to pop is just too strong. And now I feel sick and sorry that I read that story. I apologize. Please don't cancel your subscription. Apparently, the power grid in Texas, which of course was disastrously ill-equipped to handle a winter storm and cold snap in February, ended up struggling again yesterday when the day turned out to be warmer than expected in parts of the state, although conditions were not unusual for that time of year. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCTA, is it? I don't know. Which oversees the state's standalone grid, urged customers to conserve electricity and warned that it may have to enter emergency conditions, according to CBS Austin. ERCOT, yeah, that's it, said supply was tight because a cold front installed, leading to more air conditioning used than expected amid temperatures that were reaching in 80 degrees in certain places. So, yeah, Texas, really, you guys have it very much under control. Nothing to worry about there with your energy grid. No reason to improve instruction in Texas, because you guys are the best. You got it totally under control. Here is a very sad story, but an important warning. A 12-year-old boy from suburban Denver has died after his family said he tried a TikTok challenge that dared people to choke themselves until they lose consciousness. The boy died last Saturday, according to an obituary, and I don't want to say anything more about that, but just make sure you're watching your kids on TikTok. My daughters are on that way too much. They're on their phones way too much. Total parenting fail. And they get a lot of news and information from TikTok and a lot of these kind of scams and scares that are almost exclusive and go really viral really quickly on TikTok. So you got to stay on top of that if you let your kids have it. Maybe you shouldn't. I mean, I'm just on TikTok for the military training videos, and I'm never there. I've never watched like these young, beautiful women who wear nothing and dance around. Those videos are never targeted to me, and I definitely never watch any of those videos at all for more than any time at all. Okay, moving on. And a horrible shipwreck accident in the Gulf of Mexico. Massive lift boat capsized off the southern coast of Louisiana on Tuesday after severe storms moved through the region, killing at least one, leaving a dozen on board. still missing. The ship's owner said there were 19 people, employees and contractors on board at the time that the bad weather hit. Initially, officials said they believed 18 were on board. One person was found dead. The Coast Guard had responded, as well as some private ships. A lot of heroes in that horrible, horrible situation. All right. And finally, the house where Mr. Rogers lived is for sale.
A beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine?
Yeah. Fans of the late Mr. Rogers, including me, have the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually live in Mr. Rogers' home. The Pittsburgh home, once owned by Fred and Joanne Rogers, has been placed on the market for an asking price of $850,000. Okay, that is your news dump for today. It's now time to get to my first guest. Oh, I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. In 1989, he won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. He's one of the most recognized, national, highly regarded, syndicated columnists in the country, a member of the Chicago Tribune's editorial board, a regular contributor of essays and NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. He was a regular also on the McLaughlin Group, The Chris Matthews Show, Nightline, and much, much more. A go-to voice in American culture and politics, thanks to his sharp, thoughtful, and moving analysis. And Clarence Page and I met years ago when we were both, I think, at the DNC in Charlotte, he reminded me of, and he joined me several times on SiriusXM show. We had a real mutual admiration for each other, and I was just honored to get to talk to him, and of course I reminded him of all that right here at the top. He is on Twitter, and you can follow him there. You can read him, of course, at the Chicago Tribune, and you can follow him on Twitter at CP Time. Ladies and gentlemen, I had a wonderful conversation with Clarence Page, and I'm so happy to share it with you now. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, and don't be too complimentary there. Make my head swell up bigger than the frame here.
Well, let me try to do that right now, because I wanted to start by saying I was thinking about talking to you today, and I was like, when was the last time I saw him or maybe met him? And I know we'd talked before. Maybe I'd interviewed you over the phone before, but it was at one of the conventions, and we were in a hotel, and it was late. It was at night, and I was there with my producers at the time and some other folks, and you came down and you were in the lobby, and we chatted for a while, and I just remember thinking, man, I'm here at this convention. I don't know if it was DNC or RNC, and I just talked to Clarence Page, who I grew up watching on TV and on all the big Sunday shows, the McLaughlin Group, of course, and I have arrived because I just had a conversation with Clarence Page. But then I realized, you know what? I bet you Clarence Page is he's just a good guy. He was just talking to anybody who was in the lobby that day. It had nothing to do with
I'm lonely. No.
with he just getting a snack, and I bumped into him and harassed him. But
I think that was the Charlotte convention, the Democrats in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Does that ring a bell now?
I don't remember what happened earlier, but
we had to stay in South Carolina because North Carolina was booked up.
Yes, it sounds about right. I felt good also that I was, at the same hotel as you. It made me feel like very impressed.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was fun.
So a lot of time has passed, and you've been continuing to write outstanding columns at the Chicago Tribune, and I really am excited to talk to you about all of your work. But I kind of want to just look at, because I haven't talked to you, and because you've had such an impressive and long career.
Long is the word. Yeah.
Well, that's wisdom, that's experience, and I think that it's very easy for some people, younger people especially, to be terrified of the times that we're in, or shocked or whatever. But you've seen so much in your career and in your life, and I wonder how you do frame where America is at in 2021 after a pandemic and 4 years of a reality show president, and now Joe Biden is here, and everything that we're at with a vaccine. How do you see it in the arc of your career, of your life?
Well, first of all, I'm not kidding about long. I just celebrated my 50th anniversary in this business since I graduated and got drafted and all that good stuff. And so coming from the 60s to now, I don't want to say I've seen it all before. I've not seen anybody try to take over the Capitol building physically. That was one thing that was new. I got into this business because back in high school, I said, I want to get out there and see the world. I want to be an eyewitness to history. I've been amazed by the kind of history I've seen. But I think I said this when you and I first met, and we're talking about how are we all going down the rabbit hole to craziness? And I said, well, I remember the '60s, and we had about 400 race riots. I don't even want to call them race riots. It wasn't like it was black fighting white. It was more like black folks against the police. Once again, all this rhetoric we're hearing now, I was hearing back then from George Wallace. The only thing that amazes me, I wasn't expecting to hear it come from a rich guy from Queens. That's a difference, But when you look at the politics and the issues and the language and all, that hasn't changed that much. We kind of go through this kind of swings here in America. And the only difference now, the big difference now is what we're talking over right now, the internet and the social networks. And what does that do to the national dialogue? Back in the 90s, when I met a young fellow named Larry Page, and we got past talking about whether we were related or not. He told me about how he and his buddy Sergey Brin had put together this program called Google.
Yeah.
And I said, well, really, what's that? And he said, you haven't heard of Google? This was in 1998, by the way, and Google was about a year old. And he said, when you go back to your hotel room, type in google.com. It's going to change your life. I'll never forget that, because it did, didn't it? It changed all of our lives.
That reminds me of the time I met a young man who was just launching a porn site, and he told me, go back to your hotel and type in this. I'm joking. I had no parallel. I had no equivalent. That's a great story. What about, though, the difference I feel like that the internet creates, and maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but if you think about the 60s, if you think about the civil rights movement then, if you think about, race riots and blacks against the police, you think about politics in general, I don't know, did they not believe in things that happened and did believe things that hadn't happened? This conspiracy world, there's always been conspiracies. There's always been those types of issues for sometimes good reasons in a way that you can explain it. But this seems different than then, in that you have a huge portion of Americans who don't believe what they are seeing, partially because they've been told not to by Donald Trump and others. How do you compare the conspiracy theories and the not believing in reality now to then, or any other time?
Well, when I was in high school back in '64, during the Goldwater campaign, a fellow named Richard Hofstadter, a historian, wrote an essay for Harper's that became a book called The Paranoid Style in American Politics. And I didn't fully understand what he was talking about until those maniacs tried to take over the Capitol, and without knowing what the hell they were doing. I mean, I was down there. I stayed in my car. I didn't want to get COVID. None of these guys are wearing masks, but I witnessed history again. But the whole idea that people would just go crazy like that, and they did. I mean, half these guys, when they go to court now, they say, "Well, I lost control. Didn't know what I was doing. Whatever." I mean, what else can they say? But that's what happens. Hofstadter was writing about how there is this paranoid side to politics. He broke down the elements of it, and we're seeing it again today, only it is on steroids because of the internet. Now, and I mean, when I was in high school, I'm trying to remember some of the conspiracies we worried about back then, but all I can think of right now is the conspiracy that turned out to be true, which was the Tuskegee Experiment, in which scientists with the CDC withheld penicillin from black men with syphilis just to see what would happen. And that was rumored, but it was true. And you can certainly look it up on the web. In fact, the CDC website is very candid about that. They have a page about the Tuskegee Experiment. And that's the best way to deal with this sort of paranoia.
Well, it's also a way to explain, people always say, well, you can understand why black people or even other marginalized communities, but certainly black people, don't trust government because of the past. But it's a lot harder to justify it, I think, for white people, because white folks haven't been, so much of what they're being told are by folks on TV and on the internet and podcasts and so on that I just don't feel like it's nearly as justified for white folks to be questioning things like vaccines, much less the election outcome. But for
black folks,
huh?
No, I said or black folks. I mean, to be questioning vaccines now. Well, the fundamental problem is we would rather believe a rumor that tends to support our suspicions than to believe the facts that don't. And I mean, that varies from person to person and from issue to issue. But it's very clear that, studies have been done. Again, they can be easily looked up, that the disinformation that has been put out over the web, political and otherwise, has higher credibility than stories from the New York Times or the Washington Post, especially after you have the president calling it fake news, et cetera, et cetera. That's another difference. Now, we've got a guy, we don't have him now, unfortunately. He's been deplatformed, but we're talking about Donald Trump. They're in the White House agitating these rumors and giving them just enough of a little extra level of credibility by appealing to the anger, fears, resentments of people who feel like they've been left out. I just got through talking about this with J.D. Vance, the author. I did a column about it because we did a dialogue because J.D. Vance and I come from the same hometown.
Oh, really?
And I thought about this when you were talking about white folks or black folks not having a reason to believe blah blah blah. One thing that grabbed me, and I just try to make this long story short, but after the 2016 convention, when Donald Trump was elected on election night, this is right after you and I had talked at that convention. But anyway, the 2016 election, I was surprised that Donald Trump won, and especially that he carried Ohio, my home state, because Ohio has always been a reliable swing state. It's much more in the Republican column now. And that began right there with Trump. And my fellow journalist covering the campaign said, have you read this book, Hillbilly Elegy? It was all the talk among the reporters who wanted to learn about the Trump voter out there, this disenchanted, mostly white, mostly male body of voters who felt passed over, left behind by globalization and that's my hometown, Middletown, Ohio. It's a steel town. When I was a kid, though, back there in the 60s, Middletown was a robust all-American city. And now it is the steel mill is a fraction of its former self. The 5 paper mills we had are all gone. Across Ohio, you go Youngstown, Toledo, Akron, you see this disinvestment in the state. And it has become more and more a place where you've got displaced workers who are resentful. You know about the debate now over whether the core Trump supporters are racist or feeling economic
anxiety. Yeah.
Well, I believe both. I know both because I've talked to folks on both sides. And that was something, that's why JD and I got together under the auspices of Bob Woodson, the black conservative who runs the Woodson Institute, for an hour-and-a-half dialogue in Ohio. You can find it on the web now, just talking about what happened to our hometown, what's happening, and what we look forward to in the future.
When was that you guys talked?
That was last week.
Because have you heard about like this controversy about some comments he made?
Yeah.
Because you're the exact person to talk to about this because A, you did that interview with him and wrote that column, and B, you've been writing a lot about cancel culture or whatever people want to call it, as well as redemption, which is, I think, important. But your most recent column at the Chicago Tribune is about Tucker Carlson and this replacement nonsense. It's a great column. Everybody should read that and everything that Clarence Page is writing, but apparently J.D. Vance called Fox News, called Tucker Carlson the only powerful figure who consistently challenges elite dogma. The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, of course, is what Tucker Carlson said. How do you connect all of what you've been writing about? Because Vance has had to leave the board of a company that he was on. Apparently, this has been a lot of controversy about that. What do you can tie it all together with just referencing your recent columns and your conversation with him?
Well, I could tie 99% of it together after these comments. After Tucker's comments came out, I sent him an email saying, "You want to talk about this?" I'm still waiting to hear from him.
Oh, wow, interesting. Okay,
program here.
Yeah,
but I've not heard from him, and I haven't seen him quoted by anybody else either. So I think he's lying low on those comments. And my feeling is, though, that Tucker gets it. I mean, JD gets it from both sides. As you could see in the column I wrote about him, he is a more moderate conservative. Certainly, well, he's really, in fact, he came right out of the Lincoln Project group. I mean, the anti-Trump folks. He, until, I don't know, the last year, he was known for a lot of snarky anti-Trump tweets. Because he comes from that same kind of background and that same general area of politics that I do. I consider myself to be a left-leaning moderate, but I've parted from the left on a number of issues. I deplore the defund the police slogan, and I've written about that. We do need to rethink policing, but the reckless slogans like that really hurt our cause, and et cetera, et cetera. And that was the whole thing about our dialogue, because JD and I both want to do what we can to help restore jobs, family, et cetera, but do it in a thoughtful way, not just use those issues for scapegoats, et cetera. But JD is planning to run for the Senate from Ohio.
Oh, wow.
And that means he's got to have all those right-wing Trumpites. I mean, like I said, the party, I don't need to tell you, 85%? It's probably not that high now since January 6th, but it hasn't fallen that much. The party is still Trump's party. And you can see the establishment Republicans are jittery about how much impact he's going to have. And so I see the position JD is in right now, and I'm eager to talk to him, but I haven't gotten clarification.
Well,
either.
maybe this replacement theory stuff is very scary. You wrote about it in your most recent column, and I want to talk about it because you add the historical preference that is so needed on this and the accurate statistics of actually what America is right now in terms of ethnically, and the confusion around how we identify, because we are so mixed at this point. So what was your reaction first to this idea? You also do a good job at articulating what replacement theory is and how it's sold. When you first, heard that, where did it come from?
Well, replacement theory basically it's just based on the old paranoid fear of they're coming, so they're going to take over. It's the ancient anti-immigrant fear that this country is known for, because we're a nation of immigrants. But it's not just us. Look across Europe in recent years. Their politics have been roiled by the immigration issue as well. And that was where the replacement theory, that phrase came from, a right-wing French philosopher put out. You know how the French love to do essays and love to philosophize.
Yeah.
A right-wing Frenchman came up with replacement theory, saying that in one generation, they can come in and just take over the whole country. And that has, like I say, roiled the politics in Europe. And Donald Trump used those same kind of fears over here. His whole immigration argument is nothing new. Build a wall, expel as many as you can, blah, blah, blah. And that is... it's certainly ironic. Look at what was it? Phil Bump. One columnist went back and talked about Tucker Carlson's family, and when they came to this country, and they came more recently than the columnist family did. But yet, like the old American tradition, we believe in y'all come until our family is here, and then it's stay away to everybody else, and that's a basic reflex. Trump plays the dark side of it. By building walls, et cetera, because both Republicans and Democrats at the time Trump came along, were trying to find some sensible way to have comprehensive immigration reform. Remember Marco Rubio?
Well, I'm glad you bring it up. I harp on that, Mr. Page, all the time, especially this week, because John Boehner's out hawking a book. And I think that people forget what you just mentioned, which is in a very divided Senate, in a very divided country with Barack Obama as president, the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform with billions of dollars of border security and so everything basically Republicans wanted, except the most extreme stuff of closing down the border and kicking everybody out. But it was a huge compromise. It was a hard fought win in the Senate. They sent it over to the House. And the story, the way I hear it is John Boehner, Speaker of the House at the time, didn't take it up for a vote because it would have passed. He is the single most responsible person for the immigration problem. John Boehner, who's out selling this book, it would have passed. And then they wouldn't have had that as a wedge issue. I'm not sure if that's your recollection of history, but that's certainly what I've read a lot about. So it's very important.
Well, coincidentally, guess what district J.D. Vance and I grew up in? John Boehner's district. So I do have some insight into what was going on. And if you read Boehner's book, and I have not finished the whole book, but you'll see why is that. You probably heard about he closes the book saying, and by the way, Ted Cruz, go F yourself.
Oh, I didn't know he closed it on that. He is like that the last sentence. That is hilarious. I
haven't gotten to the finish yet, but that's what he.
It's great.
Says. He's also been interviewed on that. Why did you blah blah blah?
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, why did Boehner do that? Because he seriously does not like the right wing caucus in his House caucus, or right wingers like Ted Cruz, who would come over to this to the House and just to agitate. And Boehner's very clear about the same folks that JD and I have talked about, those politicians who don't really want to get something done except raise their profile, write books, and get on TV a lot and make some money. That's the big problem that Boehner had to deal with. At the same time, as he says, he is or was the Republican leader of the House. Yeah. And what was it? Boehner says, a leader without followers is just a guy out for a walk. And that's true.
Well, that's like my Twitter account.
I'm sorry?
That's like my Twitter account.
There you go. Right? I mean, I give Donald Trump this much credit that he is a leader. And I had to concede that after I saw, when he took off running for president, I said, oh, what a clown. He's going to make some money, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But then I saw one by one, all the pillars of obstruction fell inside of the Republican Party among Republicans.
No.
Ted Cruz beat him in Iowa. But after that, Trump just kept boom, boom, boom. And I could see this guy's a salesman, number one. We know that. It's one thing that Trump has been all of his adult life.
But to be clear, so is John Gotti, Vladimir Putin, and Mussolini. I mean, they're all leaders. They're all salesmen, and that's exactly what Donald Trump is. So is Sean Hannity. I mean, they get their message across. They get people to follow them, and there's a million of those folks out there.
Even an autocrat has enemies too, or autocrats have to care about their constituents. And even this is one thing about Putin. Just a quick point. Most important thing I learned about Vladimir Putin, thanks to Masha Gessen and other folks with a real insight, is that he's as worried as anybody else about his own constituents. He's a lot more worried about his constituents and support from them than he's worried about the United States. And we make a mistake when we think Putin's always got us on his mind. That we like to think we're number one on everybody's minds, but no. And that was the big advantage Putin had with Trump, because he wasn't worried about Trump at all. He had some power over Trump, and so that was we'll see how he handles Biden.
Yeah, it'll be. I mean, it's a fascinating story what's happening there, because they control the media, state media, the traditional media, but they don't control social media, where there's a lot of obviously activism and more freedoms of speech in Russia, especially with young folks. It's fascinating.
Look what he does, though. Look what he does. This is the way autocrats work in the social network age. They set up their own media. You see how many people Putin's got out there in these
Look how much he affected, hard to measure, but how much did Putin affect American social media by, creating accounts and having, a bunch of guys in the basement with keyboards just really influencing my argument with somebody else on Facebook. And I'm arguing with like a Russian.
That's right. The bots. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about. That's the same thing that's happening in the Philippines with Duterte and Turkey. All of these countries now with modern age autocrats, they've all got media networks. They know how to work it to their advantage. That's something we've all got to be aware of, too.
So you write in this in your most recent piece, though, at the Chicago Tribune about, and you make this very good point about, listen, you don't have to be afraid of people coming in here from other countries. You just have to win them over. You can make them your voters. And history shows us that that's the case, right?
Of course, that's how this country thrived. Remember the know nothings. They're in. I know you're not old enough to remember the know nothings, but I'm almost old enough. But anyway, but no, that was back in before Lincoln, and they were primarily anti-Irish Catholic immigrants. I remind Pat Buchanan of this every time we get a chance to chat. That if it's know nothings had gotten into power, his Irish great grandmother wouldn't have gotten into the country. And yet, in that tradition I was talking about, he's been anti-new immigrants ever since. And he was the original wall builder when he ran for president in '92.
How many times would you say that you? I mean, how is old Pat Buchanan? I mean, you used to be on TV with him all the time.
Until John McLaughlin died, unfortunately, and we also had some success here, actually, in bringing the show back after his death. Me and Pat and Eleanor Cliff, in the center of the Bring Back the Show movement, and we were operating well on the web and in a number of stations across the country, but. We ran into problems. Ran into legal problems with the McLaughlin estate and all, which we're still hopefully working out. But I won't go into all past history. But no, the show was very popular. The bottom line is, Pat and I have known each other for the last 30 years now, and Pat gets along great with you socially. Just don't bring up politics. That's the best way to get along.
Well, I mean, he's the original wall builder, but on the issue of immigration, he is Lou Dobbs, and Lou Dobbs is Donald Trump, and so on and so forth. And now, what Tucker is saying with this replacement theory is just, it's different than what Pat Buchanan, I think, said. It's different than what a lot of these guys said. He's not whispering. It's the most blatant. What do you think of Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL, and just anybody demanding that, in his case, Fox News fire him? I think we should take these at a case-by-case basis, but you've been writing a lot about this phenomenon. Some people refer to as cancel culture. Tucker Carlson, does he have to go?
First of all, with cancel culture, both sides do it. Let's just establish that, number one. It's not, but
Trump canceled like 500 American companies, including Fire Goodyear, I think. From Ohio.
But in any case, I don't believe in firing people for their views when you hired them for their views. But if you hired them, you can fire them. It's up to you. I just don't like the idea of people out in the general public saying, no, you need to fire him because we don't like him. Even Tucker Carlson, and I had to, I'd have my barf bag at hand to do it, but I had to say, no, I don't believe that he should be fired because an outside group says to do it. But that at the same time, though, a lot of these, and it's mostly Republicans who are harping on this cancel culture theme, when it's somebody they like, then they say, oh, you can't do that. That's against free enterprise. Right. If Rupert Murdoch starts a network and wants to hire and fire, that's his right. Nobody else should tell him, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't have it both ways, folks. That's all.
How are we doing, Clarence Page, in America right now with race relations? It is terrifying out there. And I have done my best to communicate with people from all backgrounds right here from my shed in the past year, and certainly in real life, or as the kids say, IRL, I think. Is that right? And but what we're seeing right now is like the pot simmers from time to time, and it boils over, and you've seen it, and you've been there for every one of them, and literally there, I'm sure, many times. And so how do you see what's happening right now with police violence, with this new civil rights movement that really a lot of people attribute its success to the fact that there was a pandemic and we were forced to watch this video of George Floyd? You have this case right now with the police officer in Minneapolis. You have these other recent shootings. It seems to be almost every day, and you have cameras everywhere now. Where are we? How do you look at where we are? Explain this to me the way only you can.
Yeah, just like I said about social networks, the cameras have accelerated the process and the argument. But I think back to the 60s, we didn't. Well, first of all, I mentioned those 400 riots. Almost every one started with an episode of alleged police misconduct. So let's put it that way. They were all centered. They were all ignited by some kind of police behavior. Detroit, Chicago, New York, go on and on. In fact, by the way, before Watts, there were 2 New York riots. Everybody's forgotten about it. It amazes me. I was in high school in '64. You had one in Harlem and one in Brooklyn. And go back to and see the headlines. But it was next year in Watts that captured everybody's attention because it broke out in about 2 weeks after the Voting Rights Act was passed, a year after the Civil Rights Act was passed. LBJ was president, thought that he had it made in the shade with black folks, and then boom, a riot breaks out. And LBJ didn't know what to make of it. And J. Edgar Hoover said, it's the Russians. And they actually seriously looked for some kind of communist or Russian influence with that. No, it was the fact that police misconduct was again there in Watts, and Watts was a powder keg waiting to happen. Just because this was lovely, sunny California and the houses looked nice from the outside didn't mean there was a lot of discontent inside. If you want to know what it looked like, check out Boys in the Hood, that wonderful movie.
It's one of my all-time favorite films.
Yeah, you know
growing up in like Lily White, upstate New York. And having very little exposure to diversity in general outside of my actual family, where there are some interracial relationships. But I mean, there's just so little. And I remember seeing that film and it being like a coming of age movie. There's very few films, at least for me, that have affected me so much. And I was like, wait, that's an accurate depiction of a community in America now? Really?
Right.
I had no ability to relate to any of it.
Yeah, well, it was a long way from Harlem, you know, and Harlem today is a long way from Harlem back then, by the way.
Yeah.
We go through a lot of changes. But that was, getting back to your question, though, about, how far have we come with race relations here. What surprises me, Pete, there's so many different things, but one thing in particular was the Black Lives Matter movement and the reaction to George Floyd. And I didn't like the Black Lives Matter title for the same reason, defund the police, because it can be too easily manipulated by your enemies, and that's what's happening with a lot of folks. But beyond semantics, the fact is that we do have all these marches that occurred after George Floyd's death, Pete. I was looking, and I was at a big march here in D.C., and what struck me was all these white folks, you know. We had marches in the 60s, and there were always, of course, a white participation. But now it's like mostly white folks I see. I live in an integrated neighborhood, and my white neighbors have more Black Lives Matter signs in their yard than the black folks do. And it's like, this is a big difference. And I credit video here, a video of George Floyd's death. Imagine if we hadn't had the cameras. You see the kind of defense that the police attorneys are trying to present. They're trying to recast the whole thing. You talk about disinformation, but we still got that video. We still keep coming back to that. And all the efforts to say George Floyd was on drugs, blah, 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 just kind of fall away.
Well, the two Americas would be that when white people see videos of, in this case, black people being murdered or abused, they're shocked. We're shocked. Like, oh my God, that's horrible. I can't believe that's happening. And black people are like, we didn't need the video.
Right. That's right. That's right.
I live here.
No, we didn't. We still don't. But but the fact is, we do have the video now. But look at these various cases around the country.
Yep.
Now, the ones that have video versus those that don't.
Well, Rodney King.
But that makes Rodney King. Go back to that. Yeah, Rodney King was the first one you could say that really, you could say, launched this new video era.
But you can also go back to, I mean, I've been reading a lot about history and I've learned a lot about John Lewis in the past few years, and you can go back to the bridge, and Selma and the fact that apparently news coverage of police officers beating the shit out of innocent black folks who were marching peacefully across the bridge, that too was a catalyst for change, those images. Is that right?
I'll go back farther than that.
Okay.
In fact, was it 63? The Birmingham March, and that was voting rights, where they had the police dogs and the fire hoses. Remember that? When I just say police dogs and fire hoses, everybody says, "Oh yeah." That was Bull Connor, the police superintendent there, who launched the fire hoses and the police dogs. And later on, and now civil rights veterans I've interviewed all agree that Bull Connor did the movement the biggest favor he could have by bringing out those police dogs and fire hoses, because that video went around the world.
Right.
When I was in high school there, I remember it very well. And it was a few months before Dr. King's March on Washington. So you could say it set up the whole thing beautifully. That's why the world changed for black folks so much from, let's say, 1960, and by the way, 1960 was when those lunch counter sit-ins occurred there in North Carolina. That, again, people still replay that video to see the brutality. And that was just, those black students got sugared and eggs, raw eggs dumped on their heads. That wasn't police beating them up, but still, that kind of resistance just for a lunch counter. And in my hometown there in Middletown, by the way, I talked with JD about this when I was in high school at that time. One of my classmates, his father, had a restaurant downtown that made the best chili dogs in the Miami Valley. And, everybody loves the food from their hometown.
Yeah.
Always think of those chili dogs. But when I went in to get a chili dog, they put it in a brown paper bag so I could take it outside. Because black folks, or we were colored in those days. And I'm talking 1962, 63. Colored people couldn't sit down at the booths or the counters there. This is in Ohio. So, this was all across the country, that era there. That video changed so much. And that was the only difference now, Pete. I used to work in TV back in the 80s, and I've got more electronics in my smartphone than the CBS station I worked for had in their control room.
Right.
Everybody's got a TV studio in their pocket, so I advise you all to use it wisely.
Use it wisely. Great advice. All right. Well, finally, you mentioned that you didn't love certain slogans because of the messaging outcome. And I think that's really an interesting and important point to make. But I now wonder, because I wanted to ask you lastly here, given your perspective and what we've been talking about voting rights and about what the civil rights movement in the 60s fought for and achieved, and, what steps we've taken forward or backward. And so right now we're seeing voting huge issues right now in a number of states, and it's being called by Joe Biden and a lot of activists a new Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander wrote this book. It was specifically about incarceration several years back, which was a game changer, I think, for a lot of people to learn and read about. But what do you think about that slogan? And furthermore, what do you think about the movement to roll back voting rights?
Well, that slogan for folks of Joe Biden's and my generation know that this is a new Jim Crow going on. It is not, and of course, at the same time, conservatives are justified in saying, "Well, this isn't like Jim Crow. We don't have white and colored signs and other kinds of egregious discrimination." But what we have is, if you go back historically to Reconstruction, after the 15th Amendment gave the former slaves the right to vote, immediately after Reconstruction began to fall apart in the 1870s, suddenly legal segregation came in. when the states had the right to do it, they imposed restrictions that included voting restrictions. There were grandfather clauses. If your grandfather didn't have the right to vote, you couldn't vote. There were literacy tests, which included such tests as how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. I mean, you go on and on. This is real. It's across the South. Ask a black old timer, they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, that happened." The movie Selma deals with it in one or two scenes.
Yep.
There were all kinds of efforts made to take the vote away as soon as black folks got it. That's what you're seeing now. The Voting Rights Act of 65, plus the reforms in the voting rights law the last few years, which the Supreme Court has now gutted. With not by repealing the whole thing, but by gutting the enforcement parts that say any kind of changes in your voting laws must get reviewed before they can go into effect. By taking that away, they have now forced the voters to get enough evidence to come. But the only way to get that evidence is to have an election. So it's a flawed election, but afterwards, then you can file suit. And that sort of thing means that they are now rolling back those old Jim
as soon
Crow
as they
reforms.
gutted Section 5, like an hour later, a bunch of states were basically said, yee-haw, let's go. But you say it's different because of the signs. No colored people here, colored drinking fountain, all that. But I wonder, and I've heard this from some folks, and, you know, I generally listen to the people who are dealing with such things and not those who aren't. But I've heard from a lot of black folks over my entire lifetime that we prefer your racism overt. It's far more comfortable to know where you stand and have a sign out front than you quietly casting this huge net around our communities. And yeah, you might get a few white folks in there, but we know exactly what these laws, who they are targeted against. Likely Democratic voters in certain states, obviously black folks. So is it actually, some people say, look at me, it's worse now because it's more covert than it was then when it was so in your face. You can't come in. Here's your brown bag.
Yeah, well, you know, it's those matters of degree remind me of the Thurgood Marshall says it's no difference between a black snake or a white snake; they both bite. And the fact is, this reform era that we're in just makes it easier for conservatives to argue, well, racism is over, and that's what they're saying. That's what Tucker Carlson is saying.
But John Roberts said.
I'm sorry?
That's what Chief John Roberts said in Shelby County, basically.
He did. He did. Basically, that's right. I said, maybe we can come back for review later on, but there have been so many changes now that that's not really a problem. You know, well, we'll see. That's what we're starting to see now, if it's a problem or not. But on the optimistic side, Pete, they are energizing a lot of black voters now who have been apathetic before. And that's who makes the difference now. And not just black voters, a lot of apathetic white reform-minded voters as well. We can go on and on. There is that's one big difference nowadays, which I think we saw that in Georgia, for example. You know, after Stacey Abrams.
Yep.
I mean, she got robbed, as far as I'm concerned, in her gubernatorial race. You know, it was ridiculous. Her opponent was the Secretary of State who also oversees the election.
It's crazy. People don't remember that 2018 election.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that they talked about back in the Jim Crow days.
Yeah.
But Stacey got her revenge, though, with her really brilliant voting activation drive that resulted in not one but two Democratic senators.
Well, and if you look closely at Stacey Abrams in any interview, you can actually see the chip on her shoulder, which is saying, I'm not done. I'm actually not going to run for Senate. I'm not going to run for president. I'm going to run for governor because I should have beat you the first time. I did, arguably. You cheated, and I want your job, Brian Kemp. Like, that's what it seems. That's what it seems that she's going to run again.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You know, we're still a free country, a democratic country, small d, but you got to fight for it. You can't just say, well, that problem is over. You just walk away. And again, I give Donald Trump credit for activating a lot of apathetic voters out there with his hate messages. That's what we've seen now. And I've been looking at the exit polls and other surveys. He activated millions of people out there who I would prefer stayed unactivated. But I predicted this was going to happen when Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, came along. And it has happened. The more you let people communicate, the more they will communicate. And a lot of isolated, cranky uncles out there who sit by themselves at the end of the bar or the end of the Thanksgiving table, now they can find communion on the web.
Yep.
And so that leads to the attempted takeover of the Capitol building.
Yeah, and that's why, yes, fighting terrorism is harder now than it ever has been. That's why it's okay to leave Afghanistan, because if you want to find terrorists, you can do it anytime. Just go online.
Oh, yeah. And that's something that has been a big push of mine, that talk about terrorists. We have been honest about domestic terrorism. And back in the Obama days, when they came out with a report from Homeland Security that said, watch out for the politicization of military veterans, and I'm a veteran, by the way, I remind everybody, and that the rising white domestic terror threat, they got, the administration got pummeled by the right.
DHS, Janet Napolitano at the time, they put this report out, and they're like, yeah, listen, you got to also worry about there's a huge threat with veterans and coming back from war and so on, as there always has been. Law enforcement, although they didn't say that. And she had to roll out the apology podium, like, I'm sorry I said this about veterans. They're all good. No one's bad. It was horrible.
Official Homeland Security report. She withdrew the report.
Yes.
And now the last report that Trump's Homeland Security put out on domestic terrorism restates everything that Napolitano was talking about and says it's gotten worse.
Well, what do you think, though, about, to be optimistic, Joe Biden's, Attorney General Merrick Garland, who has some battle scars from Oklahoma City, as well as the woman that he's appointed to lead Civil Rights Division, who I've just been reading about, Kirsten Clark, she seems fantastic. Like, those appointments, I understand it's got to be a very difficult ship to turn around. So is policing, all of this. But it does seem like having leaders like that in the federal government, at DOJ, et cetera, they know that there's a problem, whether or not they can do much about it in terms of domestic white terrorists.
And let's remember, so do Republican congressmen and senators, because they almost got killed by that mob there on January 6th. And that's something, you could see the rage in Mitch McConnell's face when he talked about what Donald Trump had allowed to happen before he then exonerates Trump, essentially, by getting him off the hook.
And it's hard to see any emotion in Mitch McConnell's face, because it does not move much. But you're absolutely right. His eyes opened a little bit when he was, they were.
Oh, he was enraged. I mean, he views the Senate as his house, and here Trump had unleashed these maniacs on his house. At the same time, McConnell's in the same position that Boehner was in. A leader has to have people to lead, and it shows you how deeply entrenched Trumpism is in the Republican leadership.
Well, last question for you. What do you say? What do you think about a person? This does seem like only on the Republican side and only Trump. Like, this one thing I'm about to say sounds super unique in that he has absolutely savaged, I'll name three people, Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, to be clear, and Ted Cruz. Savaged them. And in some cases, their wives, their fathers. Mitch McConnell savaged Trump savaged Mitch McConnell's wife, the former Labor Secretary Elaine Chao. Went after Ted Cruz's father and wife, Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, and yet they all
vice president. How about Mike Pence, his own vice president?
But they are all still. They need him. How do you describe that kind of, like? I don't think much about gender and masculinity, but boy, if you go after my wife, we're never going to be friends. Much less am I going to seek your approval. What is that?
Look at how movements operate. It's not just on the right. We've seen left-wing maniacs who've gotten that same kind of charisma and been able to generate it. But the fact is that the attitude of the average Trump voter, if I can use that phrase, is, well, that's okay. That's just Trump being Trump. He's going to throw his fists around and insult people on his own side as well as the other side. But don't you insult Trump. Don't you turn around and do anything to get in Trump's ways, and I'll still vote for you. That's what they're looking for. And that is the kind of uneasy peace that Trump has been able to generate among Republicans now. So that's why there's somebody like J.D. Vance, or in Michigan, or in Illinois right now, Adam Kinzinger, who is an anti-Trump Republican currently holding office. He is expected to lose that office because even his own family is turned against him, or half of it, and they think he's been possessed by the devil. That gets us into another topic, Pete, the influence of modern day religion on modern day politics. It is interesting to see how many evangelicals have say that they've left the church because of Donald Trump, or they've left the Republicans because of Donald Trump. This is another interesting element. We ought to do a whole separate show on
Let's do it. No, please, let's do it again, because that's a really important issue. I just spoke with Jeff Charlotte about that issue, and there's some great books that have been written about it in the last year or so as well. So, thank you, legend. It's so great to talk to you again. I really appreciate you joining me here on the podcast, Clarence Page. So great, man. Thank you.
And thank you, Pete. And you too are a legend. I want to tell you,
I'll
I'm not just in my own mind.
You're the best. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, Clarence Page, everybody. How about it, huh? All right. Now, very excited that he joined the show. I'm sure he'll be back soon. Follow him on Twitter. Tell him you heard him here. That'll be a big deal. He's a first-time guest at CP Time. Let him know that you enjoyed that conversation. And now another celebrated, highly respected columnist and award winner, guy I've known for a really long time because I interviewed him on my SiriusXM show for his book, his first book about President Obama's first year, his subsequent book about President Obama. Also talked with him in the past about his book on FDR. His new book is about Jimmy Carter, a biography, the first independent biography. It's called His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life. Jonathan Alter is also a documentary filmmaker, columnist, television producer, and the author, like I said, of 3 New York Times bestsellers. He's a former senior editor at Newsweek, a longtime contributing correspondent, political analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. He also co-produced and co-directed the HBO documentary Breslin and Hamill, Deadline Artists, and he won an Emmy for Best Historical Documentary in 2020. He's been a good friend and mentor to me over the years. I worked with his wife, Emily Lazar, at the Colbert Report for years, became very good friends with her, and got to know his kids and his family. So it was great to catch up with Jonathan Alter. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of a technical issue, and I'm curious as to whether or not this is annoying, because it happens from time to time. I think it's an AirPods headphones static thing, and it does happen a bit during this interview, and I wonder if it's annoying or not. Let me know, because I can fix that in the future I can fix it, but I didn't want to interrupt the conversation and fix it. Maybe I should have. I don't think it's too bad. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully you enjoy our conversation, because we had a great conversation. He is on Twitter as well, I should say, at Jonathan Alter, and here is our talk now. All right, there is Jonathan Alter. I've just told you all about him and us, and I so appreciate you for so many things in terms of our friendship and your mentorship, but mostly I really just appreciate your work, and I'm very happy to have you here to talk to me about all of your work and then deeply our relationship, I hope.
Well, I'm very glad to be with you. You know, this is my first time on your new, it's not that new anymore, show. I went on with you a lot when you were at SiriusXM, and it's just great to see you doing, thriving, and killing it in a post-corporate environment. So I'm really happy to be a part of it.
Thanks, buddy. That means a lot to me. And I was thinking about talking to you today, and I was like, I'll never forget that you were probably the guest who I prepared the most for in my first interview. And it's interesting because I've interviewed you so many times since, and we've spent time certainly a lot of time off the air chatting and getting to know each other. But I'll never forget how nervous I was to interview you that first time talking about your second book on President Obama. I'd read the whole thing. I had it all dog-eared. I'm like, oh, my God, it's Jonathan Alter. And now look at us. That's crazy. Why should you be nervous? That makes you the first person in my entire life who's felt intimidated by me. Not the case. Most people like that's not their normal reaction to me. I can think of a few. It might be pity, contempt, but feeling intimidated has not generally been part of the package. If you're a journalist who has done what you have done and lived the life that you have lived, you and you're going to get the opportunity to ask that person questions. You want to do a good enough job to impress them enough that they'll come back. I think you would probably agree to that. Is that fair to say? Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. That's what I wanted. I had a great respect for your work, and I was like, this has to be good. It has to be as good as anything he's doing right now so that he remembers it and that he comes back to me. And then, of course, serendipitously, I then started working at Colbert Report, where your wife, Emily, was a big-time producer, and then our relationship went from there. Yeah, and you did the great warm-up for the crowd, for the audience. I was the best. I was the best of all time. You were. Emily saw several, and she completely agrees with that. You know, it's like what Dizzy Dean said, if you can do it, it ain't bragging, right? So you were the best of all time. I was the best. You were the GOAT. I was the GOAT fluffer of the Colbert Report. There were others, but I was the GOAT. So I'm really happy to talk to you about several things, but congratulations on your new book, which is, I guess, a year old, and it's a shame that I hadn't reached out earlier, but it's never too late to read a biography about a president. How many books have you written? I think I have 5 books, but you've written more books, I feel. No, you've said 2 inaccurate things already just in the last 15 seconds. The book is 6 months old, and I have written 5 books, and one of them, by the way, is a collection of my Newsweek columns and longer pieces, and so that doesn't really count as a book since it's a collection. It's kind of getting through customs as a book. So in truth, I've written 4 books. Why did you actually just to amend that very quickly? So my most recent book, the biography of Jimmy Carter, it's I don't want to intimidate people, but it is 670 pages, 800 pages, including all the notes. And it was originally over 1,000 pages before I cut it. So that really is the length of 3 books. So in truth, I've written 7 books. So your statement was actually accurate. But I'm told that it reads like a shorter book. That's what the critics have said. And I tried to put in a lot of color and fun stuff and stories to make people say, wow, that's weird or that's funny, to keep people going in what is an epic American life. But, where I really screwed myself, Pete, is that I signed a 2-book contract with Simon & Schuster. The first one on Jimmy Carter. The second is TBD. I haven't figured out what to write about next. But I've already written the equivalent of 3 books for them. And I owe them, because of what I just mentioned, I owe them a 4th book now. So I will write essentially, talk about getting your money's worth. Simon & Schuster is basically getting 4 books for the price of 2 out of me. And, I owe them the 4th book. So are any ideas on what that's going to be? Is it going to be on Biden? I don't think it's going to be on Biden. Somebody else I know, a really good writer and journalist, is doing for Biden's first year what I did for Obama's first year in my book, The Promise. Doing a very close study of what happens in a crisis when a president takes office. And that's really what my Roosevelt book is about also. So
it may be that some other topic comes up a little bit down the road that involves Biden. So it could be that my next book after the next one is on Biden, but I'm not sure of that. In the meantime, I'm trying to figure out who else to write about. I don't think I want to do, but I know I don't want to do a soup to nuts biography because it took me 5 years to do Jimmy Carter. It's just, I'm not on the Robert Caro plan. It doesn't take me, 15 years. But if you want to do these things right, biography right, you really have to live with the person for a prolonged period of time. And since, as I mentioned, I feel like I've already paid my debt to my publisher, that the next book, I've told them, and they're cool with this, is going to be under 300 pages, whatever it is.
Well, I'll be excited to read it, whatever you come up with. And if you want any ideas, you just let me know.
I do. Tell me.
What I really like to see is someone with your pedigree, right, about Anthony Scaramucci. But whatever you choose. That's my idea. I'm joking.
Well,
I'm
how
joking.
Long did it last 11 days? I could call it. So there's a book that I have. It's called, I have a couple of books that would be the Scaramucci thing. So I have 11 Days in May, which is about when Churchill took office, as prime minister. And then 13 Days in September is Lawrence Wright's book about Camp David, which was helpful to me, although I did my own research on it, been writing about Carter. And then there's a book that Bob Kennedy wrote called 13 Days, which is about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I think he lasted about 13 days, right?
I think it was 11 days, yeah. Well, there
11 days, okay. So I could do that. That actually would be short enough to satisfy me. And I like that idea. But I think I'll pass, but I like it as it's a good thought.
You're welcome. You let me know.
Thank you.
You just let me know. You've got my number, and you can just text me in time, be like, hey, I need ideas, Pete.
I do. What happens to me, Pete, now I'm telling you more than I should, but it drives Emily, my wife, crazy because I'll get really enthusiastic about an idea. I'll talk it up. I'll start telling people. And then I'll wake up one morning and go, nah, I don't think so. Because you have to be married to the person or persons that you're writing about. And, they're living inside your head. They're living not quite rent free because you get an advance if you're an established author, but they are living inside your head and you have to be willing to live with them. That's why I will never, ever write a book about Donald Trump. Now, it's possible I could write about something that relates to the Trump administration, some discrete episode. Like I went through a period a few weeks ago. I was all hot to trot to write about a book about these Dominion and Smartmatic lawsuits over the election. They're suing Fox and other people.
Right.
And so that sort of tangentially relates to Trump, but I would never write about Trump, the man, both because I think he's fundamentally boring. There's nothing new to learn about him. He's not complicated like Jimmy Carter. We know exactly who he is. And the second reason is the reason that I didn't do any reporting on the Trump administration, because everybody around him is a fucking liar like he is. Basically, the fish rots from the head. And I don't believe you can really believe much of anything that any of them say, with the possible exception of some of the ones who quit, like, Mattis or people like that. But the bulk of them, the fact that they went to work for Trump already shows them to be maybe not of quite as poor character as Trump, but they faced a character test in deciding whether to go work for the man. They flunked the test. And so why should I believe a word that any of them say? So, when you want to, like these people who did all this reporting on Trump, they had to go they had to kiss up to these people, meet them coffee or a Zoom call or whatever, pretend like they were friends. That's what you have to do when you're doing source work. And I was happy to do that with Obama, or even, in my reporting, people who worked for George W. Bush or Reagan, or, I could do the basic source work that you had to do to be a journalist or write books about them. But I couldn't do that with Trump. So, I was busy writing about Jimmy Carter, who was a vacation from Trump. But even if I hadn't been busy writing about Carter, I just don't trust any of those people, including Scaramucci, enough to actually write about the guy.
Does any of that ever become personal because that they want to replace you as a way to get into that? Like, did you ever think that you would be talking to people who were kind of like white supremacists? Have you interviewed those types? And if they find out that you were Jewish or something like that, or they didn't think you were, does that kind of thing affect you when you're interviewing someone or spending time with someone like that?
Well, that's a good question. So I haven't done, it definitely got my attention in Charlottesville when they were chanting "Jews will not replace us." But I decided a while ago, and have for many years gotten a lot of anti-Semitic mail. I shouldn't say a lot because it doesn't come through in torrents, but a little bit every year for the last 30 years. My personal favorite was related not just to my being Jewish, but reference to my small circumcised penis, which I think took the whole thing to a new level, right? So it wasn't just anti-Semitism; they had to go there, right? But you get a lot of that when you're in my business. That comes with the territory. I never hide it. The only time I've ever hidden being Jewish, and often I will, even though I'm not an particularly observant Jew, I basically go to temple twice a year. I will never hide it, and often I will mention it. Even when I was in Saudi Arabia, I would tell people I was Jewish. Because I don't think it's any way to live. There's only one time when I didn't, Pete, and that was in 2000 when Al Gore named Joe Lieberman as his running mate. I wanted to see how Lieberman's being Jewish might affect the voters. So I went out for a few days, and I went into bars, restaurants, other places where I could strike up conversations with people, mostly bars. And I'd sit there and I'd say, so Gore's running with this Jewish fella. What do you think of that? And I just wanted to see what people would say.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, your impression of a goy could use some work. So he's, hey, what's my name? Jonathan Henderson. What do you think about this Jew guy? They're like, sir, I think you're Jewish, by the way. You're doing a caricature of the rest of us. What do you?
It was bad. My schnoz didn't help. Nobody got on to me, interestingly.
Well, that would be a good reason to go undercover.
I passed. But most of what I found was philo-Semitism. Like when I would, everybody said it wasn't going to affect their vote. Although I actually think that it did. And that one of the reasons that Gore lost was, nobody wanted to mention it. But I think there were a certain number of voters who didn't like it, but unmeasurable. But what I found anecdotally was more like, Lieberman, he'll be good on the budget. There was a lot of that Jews are good with money stuff.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the.
Anyway.
Anyway, yeah, moving on. I wanted to talk with you. I think one of the most interesting things to discuss with Jonathan Alter is what happened before a president was elected. And I think it's a good thread to tie your article or your piece in the New York Times about Joe Biden. And you, I think, referenced this too with other presidents. So certainly, obviously, in your book about Jimmy Carter. But what happens before in culture and in America in every way before an election matters so much to how or why someone gets elected. So, what happened just before FDR and the time before that? What happens obviously before Carter? And, of course, what happened before Trump? And most importantly now, or most relevantly now, what happened just before Joe Biden? And so thinking about Biden getting elected, thinking about FDR getting elected, and what both men had as challenges, you do tie that together really well in your New York Times piece. And so I kind of wanted to start there. Where are the similarities in terms of where America was at before FDR and before Biden?
Well, in crisis, and from crisis comes opportunity. You've heard that before. So before Roosevelt took office, the banks were all closing. He ended up calling a bank holiday, as he festively called it. But, he had to close the rest of the banks. But even the night before, Illinois and New York closed their banks. So the country was curled up in the fetal position. And Joe Biden, was facing was inaugurated just 14 days after an insurrection like we had never seen before in this country. We've had a peaceful transfer of power ever since George Washington. It's the first time anybody tried to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. And so this is very historic times we're living through. And so, they both faced these crises, and they both responded more boldly than people expected. And I didn't even mention, obviously, the pandemic, losing 500,000 Americans. That's the real crisis. And they both responded more boldly than they indicated in their campaigns that they would. And in Biden's case, it was helped by the fact that, the Democrats won the Georgia runoffs. Sure. If they had not, he would not be mentioned in the same sentence as FDR, even though before the election, he was helping me sell copies of my book by talking about the book and FDR and Brene Broadcast. But the striking thing for me is not just the breadth and ambition of both of their proposals and why I wrote, this Franklin Delano Biden piece. Biden has already spent more in 1933 dollars than Roosevelt did in his first 100 days with the $1.9 trillion COVID package. And there's a lot more to come, which he is going to get through with 51 votes.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. In terms,
I just wanted to go to sort of the, just quickly. I know I'm taking too much time to answer your questions, but in terms of who they are before they came to the presidency, that's the other thing that is almost uncanny, is that people think, oh, Franklin Roosevelt, it's such he should be up on Mount Rushmore. He's one of our greatest American presidents, right? And so you think of him as a monument, but he actually was very much of a Joe Biden kind of guy. He was really long-winded, a lightweight, derided repeatedly as a lightweight, and considered to be too infirm, not too old because he was only 50, but to be too infirm because of his polio, which people knew about. They didn't know the extent of it, and he hid that. He never was photographed in a wheelchair, which he used every day, but they knew that he was lame. And a lot of Democrats felt he was too infirm to run for president in the same way people thought Biden was too old. And I, like to tell the story of when Roosevelt went to Oliver Wendell Holmes's 92nd birthday party in Georgetown, just a few days after he took the oath. And they had some bootleg champagne there. Can you imagine like Biden going over to somebody's house, the Supreme Court justice, a few days after he's sworn in and lighting up a joint? That's kind of what it was like, what they did at this party. And
because it was illegal at the time, yeah.
It was illegal, yeah. We were still in Prohibition, right? Roosevelt was able to end Prohibition by the end of the year. And within a few weeks of that birthday party, he got a bill through that legalized beer, but they didn't actually repeal the constitutional amendment until the end of the year. But in any event, when he left, Holmes, who was, still had his marbles, said, second-class intellect, first-class temperament. Now, some historians say that he was really saying that about Theodore Roosevelt, who had, appointed him to the bench, to the Supreme Court. But I think that doesn't apply to Theodore Roosevelt. It really applies to Franklin Roosevelt, and it really applies to Joe Biden. Nobody has ever called either one of them an intellectual, and they surround themselves with people who are smarter than they are, which is very smart. But they both have a temperament that makes people feel better. And so, they compared meeting FDR to opening your first bottle of champagne, speaking of champagne. You just felt better. Like, oh, yeah, he puts a smile on your face. And Biden is like that. I've known Biden for 30 years. He's just like that. You just feel better after you've been in talking to him, even if he, like Roosevelt, is telling you some long story about what his mother told him or whatever. You just like him. And I compare it to, I used to compare it to meeting like a golden retriever or, a Labrador or something like that. Now I compare seeing Biden to seeing a therapy dog, because we're in more trouble.
Well, that's a really, really great metaphor. And I also, by the way, relate to it just for the sake of the idea. That's this podcast. I mean, I don't have a first-class intellect. I don't have a first-class temperament either, but I do have what I admire in Biden and others. You surround yourself, like the team that Joe Biden has appointed is one of the, I'm no historian, so I shouldn't say such things to you, but such an amazing team of brilliant people, the best of people who were young during the Obama administration and those who are a little older, like his chief of staff, and a huge diverse group of people. Like that's the type of, that's why I have you on this podcast. It makes the show smarter. It makes the president smarter, the government better, because you're smart enough to pick people who are way smarter than you to listen to and be like, yeah, in his case, making the right decisions. But I wanted to ask you about, I want to stop using myself there for the example and ask you about the politics of it all. FDR's Congress and Joe Biden's Congress.
So at first glance, it's no comparison. I mean, FDR, there were 59 Democrats in the Senate after his big win in 32, which was much bigger than Biden's in 2020. It was a true landslide over Herbert Hoover. And that was 59 out of 96. That's how many senators there were before Alaska and Hawaii were part of the Union. And in the House, he had even bigger margins. He had 191, a margin of 191. Nancy Pelosi has a margin of like 6. So at first glance, you would think, wow, how is, no comparison. But when you look more closely at it, the Congress was different then. And the Democratic Party was really divided into, a number of different factions. You had, New Deal liberals, like supporters of Roosevelt. Then you had people to the left of Roosevelt. And then you had Southern racist Democrats who controlled all the big committees, and they didn't give a shit what Roosevelt said. You know, they were sometimes, they could sometimes be lobbied, but they ran Congress for a long time. It was like having a bunch of Mitch McConnells who didn't care that the president was from their party. And it was kind of similar in the House. So even in the first 100 days, the legendary first 100 days that I have a lot about in my book, Roosevelt didn't get what he wanted on everything. And this is something that liberals need to understand. They're not going to get a $15 minimum wage out of this Congress. You know, Biden can do some things unilaterally for pay increases for federal employees, but they're not going to get that. And, you know, so they're going to have to compromise. And Roosevelt did all the time. And the example I like to use is from a couple of years into his presidency, and that's the Social Security Act of 1935, which established Social Security, most successful social program in American history and popular. When it was first enacted, it was a racist piece of legislation. It explicitly excluded any occupation that blacks held in any large numbers, domestics, certain railroad porters, a lot of other occupations that they thought, farmers, the answer as to why is that it was either that flawed bill, getting it past those Southern racist committee chairs, or no bill. And this is something that, is part of the education of people in the way politics really works, is to understand that politics is the art of the possible. And FDR was like, yeah, we'll take it. It's not perfect. We'll fix it later. And that's what Obama did with Obamacare. It's not perfect. We'll fix it later. And they are starting to fix it this year. That's part of Biden's plan is to improve Obamacare. So but the key thing is getting it done. And then you can leave it to, another day to make the bill better. And Roosevelt had to do that over and over again.
In your New York Times piece, you write about also the difference in terms of the programs that the New Deal created, that FDR was behind, in the way the money was spent, and how it was, by the way, where the revenue came from. I suppose we could talk about tax policy then and now is really important always to put in perspective. But what President Biden is now doing, it seems like you're writing, it's more about creating opportunities or laws, and then the government gives the money to independent contractors or the private sector to carry out things like, building chargers. Like, I guess the easier way to put it would be, we have this huge idea to build electric car chargers all over the country, but it's not going to be I don't know who would do it, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's going to be a company that builds chargers. It's the government will give them the money, though. How am I describing the differences?
Yes, no, that's a very important distinction. So Roosevelt created what they called an alphabet soup of new agencies: CCC, PWA, CWA, WPA. I'm just scratching the surface. These were government agencies that, ran these things, right? So there's a little bit of that in the Biden plan. So the best part of the first 100 days was the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was also very close to Roosevelt's heart. He, had been very interested in conservation and forestry up in Hyde Park. And so he wanted to put young men to work right away. And everybody told him, you can't do this. He said, by summer, I want 250,000 young men, no women, unfortunately, but they did have black units. I want them in the forests, clearing trails, planting trees, saving the soil. And they said, that's impossible. You can't do that. That's not going to happen. And he said, do it. And he got the Army to get together with the Department of Labor and the Department of Interior, and they set up this huge program, which became the first of all national service programs. The Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, and everything is modeled on the CCC. So Biden has the Climate Conservation Corps. I think I'm getting that right. I might have.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot about it.
He's proposing $10 billion for that, which is a lot for that, and that would be government-run national service program. But even AmeriCorps is very decentralized, and it's not run by the Corporation for National Service. It's run by nonprofits around the country, and that will be true, I think, of probably the new CCC as well.
Yeah, people talking about the CCC
bureaucracy.
Yeah, being instructed by some of the things that have worked and some of the things that have been failed with AmeriCorps. I've just read articles about how they're learning from that, and so that's important. But yeah, so that would be the most similar, you're saying, of initiatives.
Yeah, I think in some ways, because that's going to be, there are AmeriCorps programs in a lot of government agencies now, which often do things for less money by using AmeriCorps volunteers or Corps members. Roosevelt was only paying them $1 a day in the CCC, which the labor movement didn't like very much. So there were problems then in getting this done. But I think that's fairly similar in structure. The rest of it, as you mentioned chargers, and I think you made a really good point on charging stations. The rest of this $2 to $3 trillion that will be spent will not be huge new bureaucracies. It will be done through, state and local government, nonprofits, and often federal contractors, businesses that get the contracts to rebuild the roads and bridges, for instance.
So the other, really important thing that you mentioned in your New York Times piece, and it's really interesting, and you're such a great analyst of politics and outcomes as well, and predictor of outcomes. You get it right quite a bit, and it's interesting to see how this will play out in such a fractured country where, a huge percentage of Americans, unfortunately, believe in crazy conspiracy theories and that the election outcome wasn't what it was, and so on. And you got that media atmosphere, and they're only listening to their favorite white supremacist on Fox or something. And then you've got these gerrymandered districts, and so why would it matter to them? But what you're saying is that the Biden administration, that they're strategically, and that Congress is strategically creating a lot of projects in deep red districts and states. How could you deny the progress and the outcomes and hoping that will make a difference? What do you think? What are they doing, and how does that play out in, say, the midterm elections?
Well, the midterms are pretty far away, but the bad news for Biden is that he's probably going to have to do most of his scoring in the first period, in the first couple of years. So Roosevelt was so successful that in his first midterms in 1934, he added seats to his already huge totals in both the House and the Senate. And people were just confident that he was leading the country in the right direction. That did not happen again until 2002, almost 70 years later. And when George W. Bush used some, nasty ads against Democrats saying they weren't patriotic to ride 9/11 to victories in the 2002 midterms. So the physics of American politics are such that usually you lose seats. The president in power loses seats the way Trump did in 2018.
I know, but I know.
And there's no margin for error for the Democrats. So they actually, the best estimates right now is that they'll probably hold the Senate and maybe even add a couple seats in the Senate. But the gerrymandering is such that they're in serious danger of losing the House. And if they lose the House, it doesn't really matter if they hold the Senate, because you need both. The odds are that Joe Biden is going to have to do his big things in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. If they lose the House, it's going to be really hard for Biden, for any legislation, to get it out of the House to a democratically controlled Senate. If the Speaker of the House is Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts about Matt Gaetz. Like, I was just saying to Emily this morning, like, if they get him, and he's done, and he'll be roadkill. But if he gets off, I think he'll be stronger. I think that's the pattern now.
Yes.
With these guys, is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's like Hemingway, if you watch that documentary. So yeah, I mean, they better fucking get him.
I've been critical of critical of the media coverage of it. Not that it shouldn't be covered. Obviously, it should be covered. It's a huge scandal, and the New York Times, breaking a lot of stories out of the Department of Justice or something like that. But like the amount of time given on cable news or anywhere, podcast, everybody's talking about it. I'm like, unless he gets indicted, exactly what you say, he's only going to be stronger. And boy, you don't want. He sounds like he is obviously a terrible person. So giving him any more strength is a bad idea. So,
well, all of these people, something that just quickly on these guys, on Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, they are, as he said, going on TV is governing. That's what Gaetz said.
He did.
Well, he can think that, and you can go, well, okay, well, yeah, in the Trump era, like tweeting and going on Fox was governing, but it actually isn't governing. It doesn't have anything to do, unless you've got the votes, with passing legislation that changes the lives of people.
Well,
even,
but it is
administrative decisions. So the thing to understand is that right now, this guy Gaetz and Greene, they have zero power, zero actual power in our country. All they can do is make noise and champion their Trumpist ideas, but they have no power to do anything.
I think you're making an obviously true point about what is governing and what isn't in the traditional sense of the definition of governing. But I think you would agree that for the past, I don't know how many years you'd put on it, Republican governing, I've been saying this for years because I've been in the media and worked with all these right-wing media people at SiriusXM and so on. Republican governing is done in the media, and Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and a few others are absolutely wagging the dog that was Donald Trump. And that is, by the way, most Republicans. I mean, John Boehner wrote basically a whole book about that. That is how they govern.
Right.
They take their lead.
No
Hannity.
Question, but they're out of power now. So they don't,
but when they were in power, it was up to Hannity.
Court. When they were in power, 6 months ago, Matt Gaetz had a lot of power because he was whispering in Trump's ear.
No, but Hannity was whispering.
Anymore. That's my point. It sounds obvious, but Matt Gaetz and all these blowhards going on Fox because Trump would make his decisions based on what he saw on Fox.
Yeah.
So they had immense power under the terms that you're describing when Trump was president. It's less than 6 months ago, anytime before January 20th. They had a lot of power. Basically, Sean Hannity was president of the United States. But what I'm saying is that people have to recognize that, and when John Boehner was speaker, they had a lot of power. They had him they had him completely hogtied, as he explains in his book. But, if John Boehner was minority leader, when he was minority leader, or when Kevin McCarthy is the minority leader, they don't have any power. They can yell and scream, and the press constantly doesn't understand this. They say, whoa, there's no Republican support for this in the House. Well, it's different than in the time of Roosevelt when you couldn't hold all the Democrats. The Democrats have great party discipline now. And the other side, oh, it's a steep climb in the Senate, for President's, infrastructure agenda. No, it is not a steep climb in the Senate. Joe Manchin will demand certain changes, the way he had a couple of changes on the COVID package, and then the bill is going to go through. He's not going to blow up the centerpiece of his president's program. He's not going to become a Republican. You see that on Twitter. That's not going to happen. So basically, this humongous thing that Joe Biden has proposed is close to being a done deal in one form or another. Now, there's a lot of space between $2 trillion and $3 trillion. It might be closer to $2 trillion. It might not be. It might be when he wants, $10 billion for the Climate Conservation Corps, he might get $5 billion. It might be that when he wants a 28% corporate tax, there are indications that Manchin won't let them go up higher than 25%. But, it used to be not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, it was 35%. So it's still then they took it down to 21.
And nobody's paying it anyway.
Nobody's paying it anyway. And so to go up to 25, liberals shouldn't have a conniption about that. It's still, it's still higher than we have right now.
I will have a conniption about. Don't you tell me what I can have a conniption about. I have 3 a day, and I will have to check in more with you about which are right.
Well, you need that in your business. You need that. You have to have it. You have to have it if you have your show.
Well, hopefully not on the air. It's not ratings driven anymore. So I just love to have great conversations, and I thank you so much for joining me today. I unfortunately have to. I'm called, and you have to go, and I really appreciate you talking to me. I'm going to be getting deep into your new book, and I hope that we can talk a lot about Jimmy Carter the next time and anything else. Thank you so much for being on my podcast, Jonathan Alter.
Thanks for having me, Pete.
There he goes. Hopefully that static wasn't too annoying. Let me know. Email me, email him, tweet me, at Jonathan Alter, at Pete Dominic. This is at Stand Up with Pete on Twitter, and I cannot thank you enough for joining me today. A little over 2 hours, today's show. Who listens to a 2-hour show? I mean, you pick and choose. You listen to the whole thing. If you get a long commute or a long walk or something, I don't know. But I put it all out there so you can pick and choose what you want. But I always like to believe that everybody listens to every minute of the show. But 2 great guests, big-name guests, joining me on today's podcast. Very excited. Tomorrow's show, planning to have Christian Finnegan and Goldie Taylor. Hope to see you tonight at the Hangout at 8 East. And who knows who's going to show up at that. Always a lot of fun. Thanks for tuning in today, downloading the podcast, giving it a 5-star review, writing a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you aren't already a paying subscriber, sign up right now at patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes right now, and you can join us on the Discord platform after that. That way, you're never alone. Always somebody to chat with on Discord. All right, that's it. I'm out. John Carroll, take us away.
Stand our ground, and then stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make scene of that experiment. If you stand up, all right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 stand up.
And here now is comedian and contributor to Stand Up, at JL Covan, with a hilarious impression, powerful eulogy, him doing Trump, eulogizing Bernie Madoff.
So I was headed out to play a nice round of golf at Mar-a-Lago this morning. It was a beautiful day. And then I got some... It's tragic, the news that we just got. Bernie Madoff has died, a very talented, very wise, great financial mind, okay? He's passed away, and, you know, we've lost so many talented people. Like, if I were to think of the people, you know, I think of Rush Limbaugh, I think of the great Jeffrey Epstein, you know, even my father, the great Fred Trump. And if there is a Mount Rushmore of great talented people in heaven, I think they just got their fourth member, because Bernie Madoff was somebody with such talent, such financial skill. They call it skill. You know, I wanted to make him my chief economic advisor. I said, we got to get this guy. You wouldn't believe the rates of return that he's got. And somebody told me he was in jail. And I said, it's a disgrace that a great man with such talent is in jail. You know, the left, when people, Nelson Mandela, remember when he was in jail? Remember that? The left was we have to get him out. But nobody ever said, no, the fake news didn't say it. The radical left didn't ask for Bernie Madoff to get out of jail. I wonder why. They seem to favor certain people over others. But I wanted to make him my chief economic advisor, but instead somebody said, Gary Cohn, make Gary. So I did, and he was sort of a failure. But, you know, you just take somebody from the tribe and you're okay. You know, not the Cleveland Indians, by the way, not that. Although, can you say that? You can't. Mike Lindell, you can't say that anymore, right? Well, I know you say even worse, but you can't. You know, I don't know what they're, the Cleveland baseball team. They're never going to win with that title. But we mourn very powerfully for Bernie Madoff, who, you know, I think had the left not been so unfair to him, he would have done so strongly under the Trump economy.
So good for so many reasons. Great work, JL. Bye-bye. Talk to you tomorrow.